to Mindvine, a mental health podcast for everyone. Since our first episode in 2016, we have been sharing stories of recovery, engaging with experts, and tackling the stigma associated with mental illness. The Mindvine podcast is produced by Ontario Shores Centre for Mental Health Sciences and is available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts.
Welcome to the Mindvine podcast. My name is Darryl Mathers, and we are talking Take a Kid to Work Day on this episode of the Mindvine podcast. We have two special guests that are going to answer mental health related questions, but we also have interviewers that are grade 9 students who are spending the day at Ontario Shores, learning about what we do here in communications, what we do at the hospital, and a little bit about mental health. So before we get to our question askers, we're going to talk about our guests and introduce them. So we have Jeff Connelly, who's a mental health nurse and who currently works in professional practice. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you.
And we have Christina Fuda, who is our mental health first aid coordinator, who spends a lot of her time traveling around Ontario, training workforces in mental health and mental health first aid in particular. So welcome both, and thank you for being here on this very special day at Ontario Shores. So we're going to get right to the questions, and we have our first question asker who's sitting right over there. Welcome, Tyler, and what are your questions?
Hi, my first question is for Jeff. What's the biggest difference between medical and mental health nursing?
There's a lot of things that are different between medical nursing and mental health nursing, but I think one of the biggest differences is the way we form and build relationships with the clients, right? In medical nursing, the turnover may be a little faster. You may come in for a broken limb or something like that, and you're in and out. Mental health nursing, sometimes we have individuals who are here for a longer stay, and we really need to focus on building that relationship and also building that sense of trust with the clinician and client in order to support the best possible care options.
Thank you. My next question is for Christina. Why should people take mental health first aid?
Thanks, Tyler. Great question. I think everyone should take mental health first aid because we all are impacted by mental health in some aspect of our life, whether directly or whether indirectly. 50% of us are going to experience some kind of mental illness at some point in our lifetime. So half of us are going to experience a mental illness directly. The other half of us, it's going to be in our family. It's going to be in our workplaces. It's going to be in our community. And so in taking mental health first aid, we're really there to better help people identify when a person needs support. And then how do you help them? So many people don't know what to say I have a loved one that's going through depression. What do I say? How do I get them the help they need? Am I saying the right thing? Am I saying the wrong thing? And I think, so many of us have had these experiences before and we're too afraid to talk to somebody about it because we don't know what to say. And so when we don't know what to say, we don't say anything. And so mental health first aid is really there to better educate all of us as to how can we all have a basic level of communication when it comes to supporting somebody with mental illness. And it's something we're all going to experience.
It was one of the things we talked about today, just for people's reference. Before we started filming today, we spent a good portion of the morning talking mental health. You guys came in, helped us formulate some questions and have some kind of interesting conversations about not only mental health, but the brain and how this place works and how the mental health care system in Ontario works. So it's been a really interesting conversation so far, and we're going to continue it. It's a familiar face to me. She's going to be embarrassed, but that's my daughter, Avery, who's going to ask the next question.
Hi, I'm Avery. My question's for Jeff. What schooling do you need to become a mental health nurse?
Okay, great question. So the first thing is to become a nurse in general. So there's two ways of going about that. You can go to college to get a diploma and become a RPN, or a registered practical nurse, and get your license. And then you could practice as a nurse. And you can also go to university and you can get a degree, a university degree. That's usually about 4 years. And same thing, you'll be a registered nurse and you'll be licensed to practice. Now, then when you start actually practicing, that's where you can start doing things like taking courses or certificates to specialize in the area of mental health, even things like what we're talking about, like mental health first aid, things like that you can do to boost your level of confidence and competence in the way you practice mental health.
My next question is for both of you. What is your favorite part of working at Ontario Shores?
Okay, well, do you mind, Jeff? Okay. I love working at Ontario Shores because I find it's just such a supportive group of people. I think we all have a very common goal in that we want to better support people with mental illnesses in the community, but also amongst ourselves. I find it's one of those things you really have to practice what you preach. And for myself and, really talking about supporting people with mental illnesses, I have to say I've also felt very supportive in the 8 years that I've worked here, is that recognizing we've all experienced our own struggles. We've got to know each other all over, the last few years that I've been here. And I think it's a really supportive environment in that we really do not just support our patients with mental illnesses, but each other. And when we're going through mental health problems too.
I would have to echo what Christina said, and that mine is relationships. So in the years that I've been here, I just love the relationships that I've built with other staff that work here, the clients, everybody from like talking to someone who works environmental services in the hallway to the senior leadership team and everybody in between, especially my team that I work with in professional practice, like an outstanding team, brilliant people, and just great to help facilitate your work. So great experience, great relationships.
Our next question comes from Hayley.
Hi, I'm Hayley, and my first question is for Christina, and it is, can mental illness be passed down from parents to kids?
I love that question. Thanks, Haley. I think that's a really important question, especially, coming from younger person is today. And so, yes, is mental illnesses can be passed down. And so we do know that for a lot of mental illnesses, it's passed down genetically, but mental illnesses can also be passed down environmentally as well. So it's the common nature versus nurture debate, which we've often changed the lingo to environments versus genetics. And so we do find that when it comes to majority of illnesses, not just mental illnesses, but physical illnesses as well, there's usually some combination of genetics versus environment. So in the case of let's say depression, is we do know that there is a chemical imbalance in the brain when it comes to depression. And so your genetic code is the blueprint of, who you are and how you look and how your organs function. And that's no different than how your brain functions. So if we've got a parent with a chemical imbalance of lack of serotonin in their brain, they can pass that along to their children. But we do also know it could be from environment, is being in an unhealthy environment that can also promote mental illness. Sometimes people have a combination of the two. Sometimes a person has one or the other. So yes, they can.
Okay, and now, Jeff, what are some of the most important traits of a mental health nurse?
Oh, well, some of the most important traits, great question. And I think some of those important traits are going to be patience, empathy, understanding, compassion. Like there's a lot of them, and there's going to be crossover and to other areas of nursing as well. But definitely one I think is just understanding, empathy, and just again that ability or the skill to build those relationships. And I think that's paramount. If you want to have great outcome, you have to really focus on your ability to build and maintain a therapeutic relationship.
Our next questions are from Kaitlynn.
My first question is for Jeff, and it's, what made you want to start working in healthcare?
Okay. Good question. So originally I wanted to do something where I was helping people. So my first thought was to become a police officer. And then I thought, well, maybe paramedics or something health related. At the time I was doing a lot of going to the gym, exercise, fitness, that kind of stuff. So something health related would have been great. And then someone mentioned, what about nursing? You have the ability to help people, but it's also very diverse in what you can do. In nursing, you can work with kids or babies, or you can work with geriatrics, you can work as an educator. There's all kinds of different roles. And so that really, for me, was the deciding factor to go into nursing in particular. But healthcare in general, because I just liked helping people.
Thank you. And my next question is for Christina, and it's how can the voice in your own head impact your mental health?
Wow, that's a tough question. But thank you. It's a really important question for sure. So, yeah, we all have that sort of inner dialogue in our head, and we've really talked a lot in recent years about. Well, actually, we were talking about this earlier, and I love the conversation. Is I always thought that everybody had a voice in their head, so I always thought we all had our own internal monologue, and then science a few years ago said that there's some people that don't have an inner voice in their head. They see their life in almost these pictures. And I remember just thinking, how odd is that? Because for me, I'm thinking of this thought in my head and what I'm doing in each moment. And, we talk to ourselves, but sometimes when people get mental illness, that voice in their head can become very negative. And, it can turn to maybe putting themselves down or saying mean things about themselves. And that's where I think counseling can be such a huge part of mental health therapy and mental health treatment, because it teaches people that you do have control over that voice in your head, that you can, teach yourself how to talk more positively to yourself. And so when you're saying something mean, like I'm a failure and everyone hates me and you need to give up, and sometimes that can happen when experiencing mental illness, but therapy is so important in helping people change that thought. Is one of the important lessons I remember learning when it comes to that thought is, how would you talk to your best friend? If your best friend was having a really bad day and saying things like, I'm a failure and everyone hates me and no one loves me, and they're saying these things, what would you say to your best friend? Would you be like, oh yeah, you're a failure, you suck? Like, no, you would be like, oh my gosh, you're having a really bad time. I love you. I care about you. Let's get you let's get you up from down here. And so to me, I thought that was one of the most impactful ways I learned of self-talk is, how would you talk to your best friend? Talk to yourself the same way. And therapy is a big part of learning that. Yeah.
Next, we have Carson.
Hello, I'm Carson, and my first question is for Jeff. What advice would you give to a new nurse working in mental health?
Great question. This is a tough one to answer, but I think there's a lot of things, but one of them would be, and I've said this a few times, is a focus on viewing the patient as a person first, and not focusing on the illness. So not focusing on symptoms or treating the symptoms, but focusing more on who they are as a person, getting to know them better, what works for them, what meets their needs, and starting from that point, and then build that relationship up. And then you get to a point where then you can more heavily influence their treatment and those types of things as well. But again, focusing on the relationship building piece of it, which I think is very important.
Thank you. And my second question is for Christina. Can concussions or trauma to the head affect the emotional center of your brain?
Ooh, that's a hard question. You guys are asking all the tough ones today. I like it. Yes, we do know that concussions and head trauma can definitely impact our mental health, of course. Depending on the location of the concussion, where the person's been injured, that can make a big difference. So we're talking about, if you hit the back of your head, you can temporarily lose your vision, because that's where all your vision stuff is. But the emotional center is a little harder to get to in terms of concussions. It's kind of in the middle of our brain. So having an impact, it does happen. You can have a very hard impact to the brain, can impact all sorts of areas, but you'll usually see it impacts one of the outer areas as well. So temporal lobe tends to be more of our auditory perception. Our occipital lobe is more of our visual. This one we really got to worry about. This is the important one up here. So take special care of your head. The emotional part is in the middle of our brain. It's a little harder to get to, but we can see damage, of course. So, yes.
And our final interviewer with our last couple of questions is Jet.
Hello, I am Jet. I have a question for both of you. Is there a job that more commonly causes mental health issues?
Okay, really good question. I guess
You go ahead, please. Yeah.
first thing that comes to mind is like first responders, police, paramedic, military personnel, repeated exposure to trauma. I think that can really influence or impact someone's mental health. And it reminds me of our first responders clinic here at Ontario Shores. that was developed for that need or that purpose. So that's the first thing that comes to mind when I think about occupations that would influence mental health.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I would have to agree with that statement. However, I also like to sometimes in these conversations when it comes to identifying specific groups that might have higher rates of mental illness than others, just to be cautious of those conversations sometimes, because if we're focusing on a group that could be experiencing more mental illness, like one profession, we might ignore others that we don't talk about. So yes, we recognize that, first responders do have higher rates of mental illness, but we don't want to discount, somebody that works in like accounting or financing and think, okay, well, you can't have mental illness because you're not in that sort of frontline position. So
job's not viewed as stressful enough or something.
Exactly. So we don't want to, kind of almost like, put it into those boxes. While yes, it's important to recognize that we do have them, I still think it's better to also acknowledge that person in any occupation, could experience mental illness. If you're working, as a cashier, yes, you can have mental illness. If you're working in finance, yes, of course. Do you experience more trauma working in a first responder role? Yes. But there is also some evidence that's showing that some people in those first responder roles as well build up a greater resiliency. And I always thought I've been spending a lot of time really looking at first responder mental health support lately, and I found it interesting that they have higher rates of depression than trauma. And so we would think trauma would be the number one, but often higher rates of depression in first responders that gets untalked about. So yeah, that was an interesting little fun fact.
The next question is to Christina. What part of the brain creates emotions?
Okay, so that kind of goes with our earlier question too. Thanks, Jet. So the part of our brain that's really responsible for our emotions is called the limbic system. Is a lot of times people throw around the term chemical imbalance in the brain, and that's usually where they're referring to it. The chemical imbalance is in our emotional center of the brain. There's been a lot of research, and a lot of our treatment is based on improving serotonin levels in our emotional center. And so we were talking earlier, I was asking all these guys what they thought the strongest human emotion was. Any thoughts? What do you guys think? What would you say the strongest human emotion is?
Anger.
Strong. I was going to say something along those lines. Like I was going to say fear or anger.
You know what? Fear. Yeah. So anger, a lot of people think anger because we feel anger so strongly. But when it comes to the largest emotional impact in our brain, it is fear because it's our survival emotion. So emotions are really important for us as humans to have because they help us survive, like fear, obvious. But even things like sadness, like it's okay to feel sad. Sadness is good for us. It's healthy because when we are feeling sad, it's actually a good social signal for the other social support people in our group to help support us and take care of us. And so that's why sadness is healthy too. Anxiety is healthy. We're supposed to feel these things. Do I wish joy was the biggest emotional center? Yes. It's unfortunately, we have to fight really hard to, counteract those fear and anger responses. Yeah.
Well, talking about conversations, this has been a great conversation today in front of the cameras, but also earlier today when we were trying to sort through all this. So thank you both for taking time to answer these questions, both earlier today and on the podcast. And thank you to all our grade 9 students for spending the day here. Sometimes it'd be easier maybe to take a day off than actually follow a parent or family friend to a workplace, but hopefully you learned a little bit more about mental health, about Ontario Shores, and maybe how to have some of these conversations, or help you understand your friends a little bit better, maybe understand your parents a little bit better, because nobody's immune to mental illness, mental health. It's all something that we have to manage on a daily basis. So hopefully this helped create that conversation and give you some tools moving forward. So thank you to everybody for today. It's a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Make sure to like
And subscribe.
And turn on post notifications. Thank you for watching Mind Vine Podcast.